Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I am here with Dr. Laureen Husband. And today we are talking all things grants about monetary fundraising and getting some funds into your garden. So let's kick it off, Dr. Husband. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background in the grant world?
So I'm Laureen Husband. I currently am one of the leaders of the Jacksonville chapter of the Black Church Food Security Network. But during the day, I work for the food bank feeding Northeast Florida. And I started writing grants about 35 years ago. And I was running a program for youth, and we had very few resources in terms of funding. And in order to help the students that I was charged with, I needed to find more money. And so, my supervisor told me, well, you can always apply for grants. And I found a grant that was through the Department of Children and Families that was for $50,000 at the time. And I took a stab at it and we got the funding. And so I got hooked. That's how I got started.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I don't think anyone else out there is going to be for lack of funding. Everyone's looking for more money and everyone's kind of looking for this round. So it's awesome that we can bring this information today. Can you just give us a quick background for those who don't know, what is a grant in simple terms, and how might that be different from what we might know as a loan?
So a grant is usually given by an organization. It could be a foundation like the Walmart Foundation. It could be a local hospital foundation, like, in our case in Northeast Florida, it will be the Baptist Foundation, a community foundation, the United Way. And then you also have larger grants that are often provided by either your local governments or the federal government or state governments. And all of those require different criteria. And the difference between a grant and a loan, a grant is given out to the community for a very specific purpose. The person who holds the money wants you to apply for that money to do a very specific thing. And sometimes they're asking for you to be innovative and create a program that currently doesn't exist. The difference is with a grant, if you actually do the things that you apply to do and you implement them, based on the criteria that the grant asked you to, you do not have to pay the money back. So it's not a loan. You are being given the money for public good to do a service. And a loan, as you know, it's the kind you would get from a bank or from another financial institution, and you have to pay back.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So that makes sense. It seems like if you follow the guidelines that they're giving, then you get to utilize the income. So are there different types of grants? You mentioned there's different types of funders. Are there different types of grants that the network should be looking for? And how can you tell maybe specific ones that are better for you versus others?
So for most of the folks that we're working with in the communities that we're working in, most of your easiest grants are going to be the ones that you can get from, for example, your Walmart. So every Walmart store or a Target store or, depending on what chains of stores are in your communities, those stores usually have a very simple application where you can apply for maybe a one-time $5,000 to $1,000 grant, or your Home Depot, your Lowe's, your gardening centers. Those will have resources that support people who are growing food because they know that if they can hook you in with a little money, you're bound to continue going to that store to purchase other things that you will need to foster food access in your communities.
That does make sense. That does make sense. So let's review the process. So let's say we found a grant that looks good for us. What's next? How does this process work?
So besides just finding a grant, let's say we look online and we go to any one of the groups that I just mentioned, let's say Walmart. And Walmart, every store has the liberty to award a local matching grant to a community member. So they make that decision. So you find it, the thing you need to do is to go and ensure that the way they're seeking to fund you as a community partner aligns with what you want to do. So sometimes it's very specific. So they can say, we want to fund gardens that will create opportunities for bees and butterflies to occupy the space. So whereas you might want to do a little bit of that, if you are all in the business of just growing food, that might not be your primary focus. So you want to be specific. Maybe you might be able to take that grant that's asking for you to create a garden for pollinators, and then figure a way to, concentrate your efforts, 80% of your efforts for pollinators, plants that increase pollinators like bees and butterflies and other insects, but at the same time be able to grow food around them. So that might be one way you do it. But you have to spend time to check the language, make sure the language and what it's telling you to do is exactly what you want to do. Because oftentimes what I have found is people stretch themselves and stretch their missions to get the money. But then when they get the money and they see what the funder wanted to do, and they realize that's not what they want to do, or they don't even have the expertise in the area to be able to do what the funder is asking. So then you get into this cycle of being a bad applicant, because you're an applicant who got funded, but you're not able to execute what you said you would. And in the funding world, people talk to each other and they get to know that this organization is not a good organization to give our money to, because they don't have the capacity to do what they say they will.
And that could be a big issue for sure. So yes, it seems like you're saying we want to make sure that we find the grants that are good fits and not just, maybe looking at the monetary possibility there.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out, at the local level, one other thing that people should do is, even though I say that your local groups have the money, the easiest way to get that money is to develop a relationship with the store managers.
Oh, okay.
So actually go to your Walmart, your Target, and say, I'm a member of the Black Church Food Security Network, and this is what we are aspiring to do, and this is the reason why. And could you support us? And then they might point you towards their, their local application. But the manager has a lot of say-so as to whether you get the funds or not. And they can endorse you. If they endorse what you're trying to do, you're already 99% likely to get the funds as compared to somebody who doesn't know them at all.
That's true. It's getting your foot in the door. Relationships are big. And
Yes.
just like you said, the grant world is a small world. So I'm sure relationships definitely seem to go far. So you're saying we see this grant, we would submit an application after we kind of build that relationship. What happens after you submit an application? Are all grants different timelines? What can we expect in that waiting period?
So usually the application tells you, for the most part, you get one of the instructions, and the details in the application should tell you when you are likely to hear back from the funder, and some of them are really good at keeping to those dates. And those, I found others who, if they're not going to meet that deadline to be able to get back with you in a timely manner, they will send you an email or some type of communication to let you know. That's, once you submit your grant, depending on who they have decided are their reviewers, they convene a group of people in a room or in the virtual world sometimes because of COVID to review those grants and get back to the funder to tell them how you scored. So there's an actual score matrix, and the matrix is based on what the questions in the application are. So they pull those questions and they assign points. And if it's a federal or state or local grant application that's well created, they should already tell you how they are going to rate you. So there's a rating sheet that comes with it. But those are for the bigger grants, like if you're applying for the CDC, for example, or the USDA. Oftentimes, towards the end of the application, there's a review criteria. And I tell people, look at the review criteria as well as look at the other application guidelines, because the review criteria are telling you, this is a test, and this is how we're going to grade your test. And if you can answer everything to the review criteria and make sure you answer it comprehensively and do it well, then you are most likely to be in the pile to get funded. But if you do not, follow those directions in the review criteria, most of the times there's a group that just screens you to see do they follow the directions, and not following directions automatically disqualifies you after spending all these hours writing a grant, and they put it aside to the pile, not even to be reviewed. So, and I'm a grant reviewer. I only get grants that have been screened by the funder who has said, this is the pile that I need you to review. And I don't even get to hear about those who are disqualified before they got to my desk.
Laureen got there, right. That's a great tip, is the information is out there for us. Let's look at all those places first so that we can jump through the first round.
Yes.
So to kind of wrap up here, I would think that people jumping into this might be a little hesitant or nervous if they've never written grants before or jumped into this process. So to all of the church members out there, what is your advice, or what have you seen in your churches? Who normally writes these grants? Is it a group? Do you need the expertise? Can anyone just take a stab at it? You know, what do you have some for advice for anyone that's maybe new to this and wants to give it a try?
I usually recommend start with a smaller grant. If you can start with a local grant, an application that you're submitting to a local group, like I say, the Walmart, Home Depot, Target, or whatever other chain stores you have in your area. Usually those are 2-page grants, and they give you the confidence that you need to know that the test really is this, Kelly. Are you able to follow directions and write specifically to the questions that are being asked of you? Most of the time when I read grants, even though they may seem like they answered all the questions correctly, most people are just talking and not answering what the question specifically asking for. And sometimes they may be like very specific and say only use 200 words. And they might give you room to write 1,000 words, but they say in the directions 200 words. So right there, as a reviewer, I take a look at it and I'm like, oh, Kelly went over the 200-word requirement, and that is enough for me to put that grant aside.
Oh, wow.
Or they might ask you, what is the community problem that you're trying to solve for? So if you do not know what the community problem that you're trying to solve for, I would ask you to please take the time and maybe contact somebody at your local Department of Health to understand what is the food access issue in your area, so you have the data to support it. So you're not just saying, it's because I know we don't have any grocery stores. You actually have to have some numbers to support what you're claiming is the problem. So do some research or contact your local United Way. Spend some time on Google to get to know your community really well. You might also, like they have a lot of maps and data for online from the census that you can pull some data points from that. But really, the first point is to know what is it that I'm trying to solve for, and what data points, both quantitative and qualitative, that I can use to support the problem. And then what solution have I come up with? And who else has supported that solution based on research? So you also want to look at that, and say, based on research, this community has implemented this strategy and has seen success. And for example, we could lean to Dr. Brown in Baltimore and say to his church, which was the originator of this network, and say, how much produce were you able to harvest the first year? So we could use that church and say, based on this model, what we're trying to replicate, if we grow food on this space of land, we are likely to be able to have comparable produce from our gardens, similar to what happened in Maryland, and thus we'll be able to feed X number of people. So, you are doing your research, getting your data points in there, and then if you're borrowing a program or you want to replicate something, reach out to those people. And they may not even be in the network, but if you find them on the internet, there's always a contact for most agencies. Contact them and talk to them. And sometimes if you even know there's another group that wrote a grant and got funded, reach out to them and say, are you willing to share your grant that you wrote with us so we can see how you wrote it? Most people are, when you ask, I have yet to find anybody to say no, including all the way up to the federal government. I reach out to huge organizations all the time and say, can you share an example of a grant somebody has written to help inform what I'm thinking of doing? And that cuts down your angst and the time that you will help to prepare, because now you have a really good proposal to look at that was funded. And sometimes you can even find them on the internet.
Oh, like they might post some of their previous
Yes.
they've given.
And most funders, you know, and this is sometimes outside of the small you know, like your Targets and Walmart, but like if let's say the funds coming from the United Way or from your local government, they usually have a contact name there. If you have any questions way before the grant is submitted, contact them. They are there to answer your questions. And the question that you might be struggling with, Kelly, trust me, there probably are 30 other people asking the same questions, but they don't know how to even ask it. So they will start posting a frequently asked questions based on what you ask. And then you can go to this and see what are people asking and what answers are they getting. So basically the resources are there. You know, if you are somebody who has patience and attends to details, you are a person more likely to write a good grant than not, because it's about following the directions and making sure that you give yourself the leeway. If a grant, let's say, is due on September 30th, you should already be preparing that grant right now, because in 4 weeks it will be due, and you don't want to wait until the very last minute to write it, because that gives you more time to ask the questions that you need answered, or to reach out to groups that were funded previously to ask them questions about how they wrote or answered a particular question that you're struggling with.
Right.
So
that makes sense. Give yourself the runway to do it right and get the confidence. And I hear you circling back to that relationships, you know, reach out to, you know, to the funders or that contact. So I think that's great advice. Thank you for that. And we're here to help build those relationships too at the network. So we're happy to continue to give some great advice and some tips. So we look forward to welcoming you back and continuing to help in this area. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.